Welcome to the Long COVID podcast with me, Jackie Baxter. I am really excited to bring you today's episode. Please do check out the links in the show notes where you can find the podcast website, social media and support group, as well as a link to buy me a coffee if you are able. You should not rely on any medical information contained in this podcast and related materials in making medical, health-related or other decisions. Please do consult a doctor or other health professional. I love to hear from you. If you've got any suggestions or feedback or just want to say hey, then please do get in touch. I really hope you enjoy this episode, so here we go. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Long COVID podcast. I am delighted to welcome back Dr. Robert Groysman, who has been a previous guest on the podcast a couple of times, and I will put links to those episodes in the show notes so you can see what we chatted about before. But today we are going to catch up on some of the more recent progress. We're going to chat through some of the mechanisms and take a bit of a deeper dive into one of them. So a very warm welcome to the podcast. It's lovely to have you back.
Thank you so much, Jackie. I'm glad to be back.
It's going to be fun chatting. Before you kind of take us off into all these mechanisms, can you just say a little bit about yourself and what it is that you do for those of our listeners who haven't heard the previous episodes?
Sure. So I am dual boarded. That means I hold diplomat status in the American Board of Anesthesiology and the American Board of Pain Medicine. Now, a lot of people ask, what is a pain doctor, anesthesiologist doing in long COVID? Well, the way I started was back in 2020. I was treating patients with PTSD with a stellate ganglion block procedure, and we started noticing a pattern that some patients were coming in with smell and taste problems only, and they seem to have recovered after the block, and occasionally we'll get other symptoms coming in like fatigue and brain fog, and then all the other long COVID symptoms started showing up. But in the beginning, it was only smell and taste. So people ask, why is an anesthesiologist, pain doctor doing long COVID? Or why isn't it an immunologist or a cardiologist or neurologist? Well, the answer is there really isn't any specialty that's more equipped to deal with long COVID because long COVID affects every single body system. So no specific specialty would be an expert or considered an expert in long COVID. Each one of them would be required to learn more about long COVID and be able to span multiple organ systems, which is what I've done. So this is basically how I got into long COVID. And since that, it's been 5 years, I have evolved my treatment plans and diagnostics to more adequately address the multiple mechanisms that are involved with long COVID.
And we talked a load the first time we talked about the stellate ganglion block, which was actually what led me to you in the first place. So yeah, we talked a load about that there. So anyone who's like, oh, what's that? There's an episode already there that dives into what that kind of does. Now, obviously, in the last just over 2 years since we spoke the first time, things have evolved somewhat. And you said now that you are kind of looking at 6 major mechanisms in long COVID. Are you able to sort of briefly talk through what those 6 mechanisms are?
Yes. So dysautonomia is still a very prominent mechanism, and now we split it into fight or flight, POTS, which is postural orthostatic tachycardia syndrome, which is a problem with standing up and the heart rate going up, causing dizziness or passing out, and vagus nerve dysfunction. Those are 3 subtypes under dysautonomia. It's still considered one of the most major ones. There's mitochondrial dysfunction, which is a problem with one of the energy generating organelles inside cells. There is gut dysbiosis, which is a problem with the gut flora, causing problems and also includes leaky gut. Then we have endothelial dysfunction, which is a problem with blood vessels and the inner lining of them. And this is where clotting can come in, or microclots. There's MCAS, which is mast cell activation syndrome, and histamine intolerance, another mechanism. And lastly, we have hormone imbalance, and that includes cortisol, testosterone, estrogen, and thyroid hormones. Those are the major six.
Yeah, and they're all quite big topics on their own, aren't they?
Yes.
So do you find that people have multiple mechanisms going on in their bodies, or is each individual person just got one?
Doing this for 5 years now, a little bit more than 5 years, I have realized that long COVID is a multi-mechanism disease. It will always involve more than one mechanism at a time. And this is what makes long COVID challenging to diagnose and treat, because sometimes the mechanisms hide and are concealed by more prominent mechanisms. But until you've treated all of the mechanisms, you will not get into the recovery phase or the remission phase. Notice I don't say cure. I don't cure long COVID. I don't think anybody should claim cures. We don't know what the future holds, but we do know that long COVID is a chronic illness.
So you mentioned recovery and remission. Just out of curiosity, how do you differentiate recovery from cure? So, for example, I would say I'm recovered because I am better than I was before I became unwell. Now, I didn't take a pill that was a cure. My recovery was a big puzzle of many things, and that is true for everyone I've spoken to who's recovered. So I'm kind of curious about the cure versus recovery. People can recover because they have, but we can't call it a cure because it's not one thing. What are your thoughts on that?
My thoughts are there are some people that have recovered. Anywhere between 10 and 30% of people are considered recovered. That means that their symptoms have abated and they're pretty much back to baseline. But the way I treat this is I treat it kind of like a cancer. You don't never say you're cured of cancer, you say you're in remission. Um, and because you never know if it can come back, and we just don't know. That's the problem. We don't know if it's able to come back. Is the damage done potentially can cause resurgence of the symptoms again if you get sick, if you have surgery, if you have anesthesia, if you're under a significant amount of emotional stress. In some people that have recovered, they haven't really recovered because their symptoms come right back and they're right in the midst of long COVID yet again. So that is why I say remission more than recovery, because we really, as much as I'm just being cautious, as much as I want to call it recovery, we don't know what the future holds. So I'm more comfortable saying remission. That is, we got you better, but I just don't know if things are going to come back or not.
Right. And of course, that is better than not being in recovery or remission at all. So, we will take that. I'm just curious on your perspective on that because I disagree, but that's okay. But we're allowed to disagree. So, anyway, that was a tangent because what we actually were going to talk about today was we were going to dive into our second major mechanism. So when we talked about the stellate ganglion block, sorry, 2 years ago, we talked quite a lot about dysautonomia there, and that's a topic that's been covered on the podcast quite significantly by other guests as well. So today we were going to take a bit of a deeper dive into this mitochondrial dysfunction, which you said was the second major mechanism. So maybe we talk a bit about what the mitochondria are and why they're important first.
So, just about every cell in your body has these organelles. These are kind of a functional part of the cell that not only generates energy. Everybody knows that mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but it actually does a lot more than just generate ATP, which
Mm.
is our currency for energy. It also controls various parts of metabolism and different ions, such as calcium, for instance. And the number of mitochondria that we have in each cell depends on what the cell needs to do. So if the cell has a high energy requirement, like a muscle cell or a cardiocyte in your heart or a neuron in your brain, it will have a lot more density of mitochondria. There'll be way more mitochondria per cell, per neuron, per myocyte in the cell. Some cells have no mitochondria, such as mature red blood cells. They have zero. They are so full packed of hemoglobin to be able to carry oxygen and carbon dioxide that they don't have any mitochondria. They get energy um, by just absorbing and processing glucose through the bloodstream, what we call anaerobic metabolism, as opposed to aerobic, which is what mitochondria do.
We'll be right back. I'm interrupting myself for a second to tell you about long COVID breathing. The fabulous Vicky Jones and I have teamed up to bring you long COVID breathing. We are both passionate about sharing our expertise and experience of the breath and how incredibly helpful that can be with long COVID. We've worked together to develop a course that is specifically tailored to those with long COVID. It's a 6-week course with 12 sessions, all delivered online. The community feel and learning that we're all sharing is such a joy. To find out more information and to sign up for our courses, workshops and other shorter sessions, please check out the link below, longcovidbreathing.com, or email longcovidbreathing@gmail.com to start your breathing journey with us. When you said that there are cells that have more mitochondria and cells that have less mitochondria, and that is dependent on what their role is and whether they actually need it or not. Now, I don't know if we're going a bit off topic here, but you hear talk about brown fat versus white fat, and brown fat is much more mitochondria rich. So, is that in areas that require it more? Is that what it is?
So brown fat is typically used to generate heat. So one of the functions of mitochondria is if you uncouple the energy generation from the processing of fuel molecules, you will generate heat. Okay, the muscle or the fat will be used to basically heat up your body. This is what makes warm-blooded animals warm-blooded, like ourselves. So that's one of their functions. So instead of generating ATP, you're actually forcing the muscles to contract and relax multiple times. That's what shivering is, and you generate heat. So that's kind of yes. So brown fat is going to be very full of mitochondria.
Right, and that explains why the research shows that people who do things like cold water immersion have more brown fat because they are adapting to literally warm themselves up after having been in the cold water. So that makes a lot of sense. And that explains why I've heard about it as well, because that's something that I do quite a lot of. So cool. So that's kind of what mitochondria are and what they do. Now, obviously, being energy generators and controlling metabolism, that's pretty important in our bodies. And if that stops working, so if we get this mitochondrial dysfunction, so they're not working as they should, you can sort of see how this might bring the whole kind of house of cards tumbling down a little bit in the body. So maybe we talk about what can cause mitochondrial dysfunction and why. Is that something we can get into?
We can, but before we do that, let's just talk about what mitochondria are actually used for.
Mm.
So every time your cell wants to do something, as in make something, it needs to pay a toll. There's energy involved. You need to power the machinery for it to make it. Anytime you want to make a hormone or a protein that's going to be circulating in your bloodstream, like an antibody, for instance, or a hormone, anytime a cell wants to move, for instance, white blood cells, they like to crawl around. They're able to move around your body, and in order for them to move, they require energy. So it's just like your car or you need to supply energy for them to be able to do a task, including the liver, for instance, to break down a toxin or or a molecule. In order for it to enzymatically break it down, it needs energy for that. So what happens is if mitochondria are kind of their own worst enemy sometimes, because as good of a energy generator as it is biologically, you know that your engine in your car is not generating 100% energy from the fuel you're using, right? That's why you have a radiator there, and to cool it down, because a lot of the fuel is used to generate heat, and you need to get that heat off. That's called waste products, and you have a catalytic converter and stuff comes out the tailpipe, and that's also hydrocarbon and other stuff that has not been actually used to move your car along, right? So the same thing happens in the mitochondria. They're about 40% efficient, which means that 60% of the fuel that we take in gets used for something else. One of it is for heat, which is fine. But sometimes we kick off what's called radicals or superoxides. Basically, it's fuel molecules that haven't had all their energy extracted. So they still have some energy in there, and because of that, they're oxidative. That is what oxidative stress is. So these mitochondria that are using fuel like glucose and fatty acids to generate energy, which is ATP, occasionally, because they're not 100% efficient, will kick off these radicals, and we need to neutralize them, because otherwise you increase your oxidative stress. And these oxidative stress molecules or radicals can damage the mitochondria itself.
Mm.
So, like I said, it's kind of like its own worst enemy. It's like having the chimney plugged up and all that smoke gets into the factory, and all the workers are coughing and huffing and puffing, trying to be able to do their work. So that's the first issue. Okay. So mitochondria already generate enough oxidative stress on their own, even without any help from you, any help from viruses, any help from the food or anything else. Of course, that could be made worse by a poor diet. High fatty diets will increase oxidative stress. Eating a lot of processed foods will increase oxidative stress. X-rays, ultraviolet light can increase oxidative stress. So anyway, viral infections increase oxidative stress. So COVID goes above and beyond um, on the oxidative stress because it can damage mitochondria. Okay, it hijacks some mitochondria to be able to use its machinery to basically power itself and reproduce. And in the process, it damages the mitochondria so they don't really function well. So now you're not doing 40% efficiency, right? You may be 20% efficient. So now you have an increased oxidative load. That's number one. Number two, which is kind of the bad part of COVID here, is that the spike protein itself can damage the mechanism that the mitochondria are able to recycle themselves. So mitochondria, like any other part of a cell, it needs to be recycled. It gets old, it gets damaged, and it needs to make new parts for the cell. And that whole process is damaged by COVID, by the spike protein. Okay. So that is the part that really causes the problem, because otherwise, many viruses use mitochondria to reproduce, and they damage the mitochondria, but then you can recycle and make new ones. It's a process called mitophagy. which is generating new mitochondria from old mitochondria, from basically replace the parts that are needed and replace it. You can't make mitochondria from scratch. Okay, that's very important to know that all the mitochondria that you have in your body have come from the original egg that was produced during conception. So you can reuse parts, you can make some parts, but you can't make a full mitochondria from scratch. And that is because the mitochondria were originally not part of our cells. They have their own DNA. It's called mitochondrial DNA. And I guess the theory is that they were microorganisms that were incorporated into our cells at one point. And because they have their own mitochondrial DNA, you can't replace every single part of the mitochondria without having that. So you have to always make a mitochondria from something that already exists. So that's important because we can't make it from scratch. So that has implications. A lot of the mitochondrial genetic material was already incorporated into our DNA, into our genome, but it still has its own little mitochondrial DNA loop that still has important components that need to come from the mitochondria itself. Okay, so now let's get into your question. Go ahead and ask it again.
Yes. So I think what I was asking was what causes them to dysfunction? That was it, wasn't it? So the virus comes along and that's the trigger, presumably. What actually goes wrong?
So when the SARS-CoV-2 virus gets into the cell, it, like I said, it uses the mitochondria as part of its reproduction cycle, and it tends to damage it. It typically happens from the spike, but the virus itself can also damage the mitochondria. But that's not the big deal, as I said. The big deal is that the mitophagy process is turned off or severely hampered. So you can't recycle those mitochondria now. Like I said, there's many viruses that use mitochondria as part of their replication cycle. And it doesn't really cause a problem because we could just repair or replace those mitochondria. But SARS-CoV-2 is evil. It not only damages the mitochondria, but turns off the repair process to boot.
We'll be right back. Hey there, I'm just jumping in for a second to see if you're enjoying this episode. If you're finding it useful, maybe you would consider sharing it somewhere, a friend, a group, or even on your Twitter feed. If everyone was able to share just once, we'd be able to get this information out to even more people who really need it. So please consider sharing somewhere if you possibly can. I hope you enjoy the episode, and thank you so much. Right. So it sort of hampers the mitochondria that you have from doing their job, but it also kind of stops the body or slows down the process by which you would rebuild those mitochondria and allow them to function rather than dysfunction, I suppose.
Yes. And this is the fundamental mechanism for the chronic fatigue that we see and the brain fog that we see in long COVID.
Yes. And I think what blew my mind when you were talking there was the fact that mitochondria are only 40% efficient. Like 40% isn't that much, is it? Like there's quite a lot of waste product there.
For a biological machine, actually for any machine, 40% is really good.
That's quite good.
For any machine, biological or mechanical. I mean, we really struggle to build a better machine than what's already built.
Mm. So all of those things that we get told when we're at school, that 40% isn't very good when you score 40% in a test, like that's all a pile of rubbish. Like we should say that 40% is actually quite good. Because I saw 40% and I was just like, that's less than half. So you can tell that in my upbringing, 40% would not have been acceptable.
Sure, but for a biological machine, it's actually fairly efficient, even though 40% doesn't sound like much, but it actually is very efficient at converting glucose and other carbohydrates and fatty acids into energy. And remember, there's multiple processes involved in generating the energy. For instance, you probably have heard that fat is more energy dense. And the reason that it is because it undergoes each of the fatty acids in fat undergoes a process called beta oxidation, which basically breaks down its carbon frame, carbon skeleton, which is typically a long line of carbons, into sets of pairs of two carbons. And each time it does that, it generates ATP. And those two carbons now become what goes into the Krebs cycle, just like a glucose molecule would. So it that's why it generates way more energy than just just glucose or carbohydrates. And really, amino acids are not the preferred energy source for cells. Your body prefers to use amino acids for construction, for building proteins and peptides over generating energy. If it has to, if there's no carbs, if there's no fat, it will break down muscle and use protein as a source of energy, but it's not ideal. Um, it much more prefers carbs and then fat and then amino acids is last.
Right. I mean, that makes sense because if you're building a house, you use different materials for different parts of your house, don't you? You don't use bricks on your roof. You use bricks for your walls. So it makes sense that the body would use, glucose and carbs for energy, but amino acids for building and other things for other processes in the body. It makes sense that there's a different thing for each thing.
Well, think about it. What does our DNA code for? This is what we start with. We start with DNA and some organelles from the egg, from the oocyte, and mitochondria, right? That's what we start with. And what does DNA code for? It has codons, right? It has sequences, but all it codes for are amino acids. It doesn't code for fat or fatty acids. It doesn't code for carbs or glucose, right? It only codes for amino acids. So all your DNA can do is make proteins and peptides.
So it can't make the other things. You have to put them in from outside.
You have to create the machinery to make them or put them together. But we can't physically, from our DNA itself, you can't make anything but amino acids. That's all it codes for. But that's what creates the machinery and the parts to basically use the other things that we need.
Okay, that makes sense. So yeah, the DNA creates the machinery, but we still have to feed and maintain that machinery.
Yes. So when you have poorly functioning mitochondria, the first thing that happens is that the oxidative stress increases inside the cell. Now, there are mechanisms built in to try to reduce or neutralize these oxidative species. There's some floating around the blood. There's some that are inside your cells, inside the mitochondria, very close to the mitochondria. And the top one that everybody knows about is glutathione. It's a scavenger. It tends to reduce these oxidants um, chemically, and hopefully it prevents damage because the longer the oxidant is present, the more it can oxidize tissue and basically deform it. So if it oxidizes a protein or a peptide, it will change its shape. And therefore, the function is altered. And now you have a dysfunctional protein or peptide or a molecule that can cause damage or problem. And oxidative stress can also damage the mitochondria to a point where it actually bursts and is no longer functional. And bursting mitochondria is very bad because of that little mitochondrial DNA chain that I told you about. Now, each of our cells has a defense mechanism built in. It's part of our innate immune system, and it's designed to sense double-stranded DNA. And the main reason for this is viral. If a virus gets into a cell, it's designed to realize that there's something wrong and it's infected and start the inflammation process to destroy it and destroy the cell, right? Because it's an infected cell. But the problem is when the mitochondria bursts, it tricks the cell into thinking there's a viral infection in there, but there's not. And this mechanism, it's called the C-gas sting mechanism. And this mitochondrial DNA can activate that and cause the cell to be destroyed that way. And it's an inflammatory process. It's not apoptosis, where it's not inflammatory, where the cell can be removed without any inflammation or surrounding damage. When this happens, it's inflammatory, which means there's going to be collateral damage. That means the cells nearby can also be damaged and destroyed that way as well. And this process can magnify and cause significant amount of organ damage. So we don't want mitochondria bursting inside your cells. And this kind of leads into kind of what the process is going on with mitophagy. So I just told you that the process is significantly hampered or even completely shut off. So you're not able to replace your mitochondria or rebuild your mitochondria stores in the cells that have been damaged by COVID, and even in some people by the COVID vaccine. Okay, because the spike protein again is involved here, and it's able to some extent do similar type of mitochondrial damage to the repair mechanism. So the issue is people who try to rush the process or improve the process of mitophagy sometimes have a backfire. And it actually causes more damage because it causes these mitochondria to burst and cause more inflammation, and it sets them back. So one of the most critical symptoms that we see with mitochondrial damage is post-exertional malaise. So it's not just chronic fatigue, it's low reserves of mitochondrial energy, so that if you overdo it, even something minor, whether it's a mental activity or if it's a physical activity, something that normally wouldn't tire you out or cause you problems, makes you crash. Those are what causes the long COVID crashes that we see. And for some people, it's just getting up to the bathroom and getting back in their bed. For others, they may be able to get a quarter or half a day of work done and then they crash. My point is what I teach my patients is to avoid those crashes because it's not harmless. When you go beyond that limit, some people use spoons, some people use other ways to pace. But when you go beyond that limit, it will cause an inflammatory reaction because some of these mitochondria could be damaged. You're overloading the oxidative stress mechanisms that are built into your body. We talked about glutathione. The problem is your stores will be depleted after a while, okay, because your body is under a significant amount of oxidative stress, a lot more than it would be normally, even if you were doing everything right.
So if your defenses, your stocks of mitochondria and your energy get depleted, then it's going to take longer to build that back up again because, as you said, you can't make a mitochondria from nothing. You have to make it from something. And the fewer of them that there are, the longer that is then going to take to replenish that energy, although that stock of
Yeah,
mitochondria.
our goal is to prevent cell death, which when there's insufficient mitochondria to maintain cellular function, the cell will die. Or the cell could be destroyed by the mitochondria bursting inside the cells, and that will cause an inflammatory destruction of the cell. Our goal here is to replace the mitochondria in a slow and controlled manner without causing the inflammatory destruction of
Yeah.
cells. And it's a lot trickier than most people first realize. It took me 5 years to kind of come up with this and why some people get worse when they try to um, basically replace their mitochondria or just do mitophagy or autophagy. So a lot of people do fasting or intermittent fasting. Normally that would be great, but for some people, if you overdo it or do it for prolonged periods of time, you can actually cause too fast or too hard mitophagy. In which case, again, like I said, it can backfire on you, or in some people, not everyone. Some people maintain some function of mitophagy, some don't. The other thing is I try to avoid oxidative therapies or oxidative treatments where you're basically increasing the oxidative load. So one big one comes to mind is hyperbaric oxygen therapy. I'm not saying it doesn't have a place in long COVID, but for mitochondria specifically, your body is already under high oxidative load. And the idea behind hyperbaric oxygen with mitochondria is that your body will basically make more antioxidants to counter the oxidative load. But the problem is that you have low energy production to begin with, and your stores of antioxidants are low. So you may not get the hermetic response, which is what it's called, to generate additional antioxidants, where in fact you're actually damaging the mitochondria more by increasing their oxidative load. And one of the worst oxidative agents we have is ozone. But oxygen at 100% at high pressure, oxygen is a double-edged sword. Okay, it just is. It's something we need, but it's also something that's slowly killing us. Um, So yeah, it is an oxidative agents. We have some antioxidants obviously built in to counteract at 21%. Okay, at 21%. Um, not so much at 100%, not so much at 50%. So we've evolved to work with 21%. So our bodies are capable of dealing with it normally when you're a healthy adult normally, but maybe not so much if you have chronic illness or if you have chronic disease going on. You may not be able to compensate for the oxidative stress. So the only thing we need oxygen for is to be the final electron acceptor. That's it. So on a cellular level, that's all it functions as. Yes, it also functions as a white blood cell destruction mechanism. See? Oxygen is released. These radicals are actually generated and kept in a vacuole and are released to destroy pathogens by your white blood cells. It does the same thing to our body, though. These oxidative chemicals. Okay, so there's going to be always collateral damage. So it's always a risk versus a reward, risk versus balance against benefit. Okay. So I don't really like oxidative therapies unless you're going to pre-treat or preload with antioxidants. So you should preload before and after and post-load. If you're going to do it, there is some benefit for endothelial function when it comes to oxidative therapies, but in general, I don't like to increase people's oxidative load. I'd like to decrease it and then focus on their mitophagy and generating new mitochondria, which is called biogenesis.
Right. So this explains why, plenty of people have said that they've tried fasting and it's helped them. Plenty of people have said they've used hyperbaric oxygen and it's helped them. But equal, if not more, numbers of people have said that they've tried it and it hasn't. So again, it's this idea of, as with everything, the right person, the right treatment, the right dose, and the right time. And that all of these things can help people, but only if they're done right for that person. And this kind of explains kind of why. Some people may be able to tolerate that and some people can't, depending on where their level of different things are, I suppose, like how their mitochondria are, how all sorts of other things are going on in their body, because mitochondria don't exist in isolation, do they?
Well, this goes back to the original point that we made, and that there are six mechanisms involved,
Mm,
and
exactly.
it may help with endothelial dysfunction, but it may be harmful in somebody who has mitochondrial dysfunction, especially severe, and they've lost the capacity for mitophagy, and their body's already under high oxidative stress load. So that's why there's screening. You have to screen for the mechanisms to see which person would benefit from what before jumping into a treatment, because there is harm by doing one of these treatments if you have significant mitochondrial dysfunction. There's additional damage that's done that needs to be undone, which basically makes it longer for recovery or remission. So especially if you have huge number of treatments or prolonged treatments without preloading with antioxidants.
Right. Cool. So let's talk about what is good. And again, this is going to be probably individual. But you said that, okay, we want to use pacing because what we want to do is kind of iron out those crashes. So we don't get that kind of additional inflammation, that additional oxidative load. So, what would you suggest to increase mitochondrial function?
So as I said, first is diagnosis is to link one of the mechanisms, which is the mitochondrial dysfunction, to the person's triggers. In other words, they typically are triggered with activity, either cognitive or physical. They show signs of post-exertional malaise. There's many others, but those are kind of the big ones. And the way I do it is I created a two-step model or protocol for managing. Each one is going to be slightly different or significantly different depending on the person's needs. But step one is typically done every day, and it's mainly consisting of supplements that focus on being antioxidants and support for mitochondria function or mitochondrial matrix, basically building up, being able to build the mitochondria from the components. So that's step one. That's really just the preparation stage. So that's to get your body ready for the mitophagy or the biogenesis part. Okay, if you try to do the mitophagy first, it like I said, it may backfire because your body isn't ready and the cells will burst or die off and they feel worse. More fatigue, more PEM, more brain fog, those kind of things we kind of see. And this is something I learned from experience. Um, if you were doing this for anti-aging, you can hit the intermittent fasting and you can hit the mitophagy and autophagy full force without really too much of a concern of any issues, okay? But if we're doing this for long COVID, you have to be cognizant of the damaged mechanism. So you can't push it hard. It's like it's like you walk up and somebody crawling in the desert, and they haven't had food and water, and they're barely able to crawl, and you just whipping them to do it faster. It's just not going to work. You need to first prepare them by getting them out of that environment, right, out of the heat, out of the sun, feeding them, giving them water and everything else first before you're able to do them. That's what step one does. Okay. Then 7 days out of the month, I put people on step two, which is the mitophagy and the biogenesis part. So this focuses mainly on supplements, but there's several medications that can be used. But what I realized is that you don't want hard and fast. You want slow and gentle. Okay. And sometimes even with the ones I choose, it's still too much. And I follow up with patients and we need to back them off a bit because they're so far gone with their mechanism damaged that that needs to be rebuilt first. And so it's a long process, okay? It's done over a course of several months. It could be 3 months, it could be 6 months, it could be 9 months, or it could be over a year before I can get their mitochondria functioning normally again, okay? And you cannot rush the process if you feel better. If you feel like you have more energy now or you feel better brain fog, it doesn't mean you go back and doing your usual routine, okay? It needs to be again paced and very slowly come back in, okay? Um, Exercise is one of the greatest ways to do autophagy, right? Generate more mitochondria, but it's also a very oxidative process. When you exercise, you're actually causing your body to go through a lot of oxidation. Okay. So while it's a good thing, exercise normally is, okay, everybody, should exercise. And when you have mitochondrial dysfunction, you need to back off, okay, because exercise could be your worst enemy. Eventually you can get back into it, but in the beginning, you need to give it a rest. You cannot crash. Okay. It's very important that whatever you're doing daily, you shouldn't be crashing daily. You shouldn't be crashing weekly. Okay. If it happens once in 3 months, I'm not going to get upset, but ideally, you shouldn't be having routine crashes. Okay. And a lot of my patients, when I first see them, I just saw somebody yesterday or the day before, and he's crashing 3 times a week. And people don't realize that you're actually causing additional damage to your mitochondria. So there's multiple ways to initiate mitophagy, but you also want to make sure that it's very gentle. So maybe rapamycin would not be a good place to start, okay, because it's a very strong mitophagy inducer. Just as an example, I know a lot of people, thanks to the anti-aging community kind of likes rapamycin. But I'm just bringing it up because it may not be the best first choice or even the second or third choice when you're first starting out in rehabilitating your mitochondria.
Right. And this comes back to, everything we talk about in long COVID and ME/CFS, it's always gentle, 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 slowly, slowly, slowly. If you do anything too quick, then the body just says no. And I think most people have found that out the hard way. And often, what we find out to be too fast didn't seem very fast at the time. So it's this whole process kind of taking that step back, allowing yourself that space, taking time and a sort of sticking with the process. You said sometimes 9 months over a year. It's like allowing that process to happen and trusting in that. Um, and that's very much what I've seen with other people as well. Um, so I guess finally, we know we've taken a deep dive into this. We've talked loads about mitochondria and we've talked a bit about your protocol and what you are helping people with. Is this something that people can start the process of themselves at home, or is this something that they have to do with yourself or another professional who understands the process?
Well, first, it's always going to come down to diagnosis. Even though mitochondrial dysfunction is a um, highly involved mechanism in long COVID, it's second to dysautonomia, you still have to be able to diagnose it because every other mechanism can replicate just about every symptom that you get from mitochondria. Just like gut can replicate brain fog and the fatigue by a completely different mechanism, and endothelial dysfunction can do that. So many of the symptoms can be mimicked by the other mechanisms, even though brain fog and fatigue are primary to mitochondria, they don't have to be. They could be caused by others. So first, it's always going to be diagnosis. I mean, if they want, they can always get my mitochondrial book, the Complete Long COVID Handbook, Volume 3, which is the mitochondrial dysfunction book. I outline kind of general principles of how I do it and why I do it. Um, The second thing they need to know is no one supplement or medication is going to be the magic pill, magic cure, okay? It doesn't exist. Long COVID is complex. It's too complex to be solved with one supplement. But only if you try this one, it's going to work this time. No, it just doesn't. The point is combination of supplements in a specific pattern, a specific order, so that you use their synergistic properties to do what you want. You're not going to get there with one or two. Okay, it's just not going to work. And you're just going to be disappointed no matter how much the supplement costs or how fancy the packaging is. The point is you're not going to get there with just one. And you have to understand that long COVID is a complex multi-mechanism disease. And because most people will have more than one, some people have two, some people have four, some people have all six. You have to get through all of the mechanisms in order for there to be remission. And one other thing that I didn't get the chance to say, but I'm going to say now is dysautonomia, unfortunately, has kind of a little side effect, especially if you're stuck in fight or flight. So one of the problems with being stuck in fight or flight is it's a survival mechanism, right? It's meant for being used in emergencies to get you out of a sticky situation. But a lot of people in long COVID are constantly in fight or flight, and your body has priorities. And if you're stuck in fight or flight, your body's priorities and all of its resources are being forced to be focused on survival, not on maintenance and repair. You see where I'm going with this? So even if you fix the mitochondrial um, repair or recycling process, if you have underlying dysautonomia, especially if you're stuck in fight or flight, you may not get too far because your body is not going to give you the resources needed to recycle those mitochondria. It's still so focused on survival because that's primary, that's primal, right? If you don't survive, nothing else matters. So survival always comes first. And unfortunately, if you're stuck in fight or flight, um, treating the other mechanisms may not be very successful or may not be successful at all. So that's why it's important to diagnose first. Go through the triggers and diagnose each of the mechanisms involved. And then you have to treat dysautonomia first, okay? You just have to before you tackle the other mechanisms. Maybe next time we can talk about the EAT procedure and how that comes into the dysautonomia and how it's unique and different from the stellate ganglion block and even vagus nerve stimulation. But the point is you have to treat the dysautonomia before you can really get to the bottom of the other mechanisms. If you don't have dysautonomia, you're lucky. Then you can just go ahead and treat the other mechanisms, probably without too much of a fuss. But if you have dysautonomia, then you have to treat that first. That's something I found out from a long time of experience doing this.
Yeah. Yeah. It's like the roads in Scotland. They've got so many potholes. And if you fix the potholes, but you don't maintain the roads, then the roads still go to hell.
Right, exactly.
Which is kind of what happens here. Thank you so much. This has been incredibly enlightening. I have learned a load about mitochondria that I didn't know before. So it's been fascinating for me, and I'm sure it'll be really useful for everyone listening. So I think we have decided we're going to do this again. So I look forward to that. And thank you so much for giving up your time.
My pleasure, Jackie. My pleasure.
Thank you so much to all of my guests and to you for listening. I hope you've enjoyed it, or at least found it useful. The Long COVID podcast is entirely self-produced and self-funded. I'm doing all of this myself. If you're able to, please go to buymeacoffee.com/longcovidpod to help me cover the costs of hosting the podcast. Please look out for the next episode of the Long COVID podcast. It's available on all the usual podcast hosting things. And do get in touch at